Hi CMC, my name is Hannah Thompson and I'm here presenting the Art of Production Management. Welcome. So, what are the key skills in being a good production manager? Well, one of the first things that I remember teaching my students, some of which had never heard of production management before, was as I've always described this job role as being a bit of a Swiss knife. And essentially, that means you have to have a lot of different hats, a lot of different job roles, a lot of different ways of approaching your job and ways of dealing with certain situations that come up on a day-to-day basis. It's definitely not a one size fits all, which for me personally, I find that really exciting, and it always changes no matter what program you're working on or what kind of genre you're working on. So I think it's really cool. One of the main skills that you have to have as a production manager, which some people may not be so aware of, is you have to be really creative. And yes, that might not mean necessarily coming up with the ideas in the initial stages or going out and filming something or editing something, but actually being a production manager is extremely creative. You have a huge amount of goalposts that you need to work within, and you normally have very tight deadlines, very small pots of money, and normally very kind of high demands, wanting to make the best program possible. So in order to do all of that and juggle all of those things, you have to be really creative. Another key skill that you need to have is being a really good leader. And as a production manager, you will find yourself always being the person that people come to with their problems or their questions, or whether that be sometimes personal, professional, you are always the first port of call. And so to be a good leader, you have to really set the tone on any production with your leadership skills, working with your series producers, and you really need to kind of be the forefront of your production and of your team, which I think is a really nice position to be in. You also need to be really good at problem solving, and that can be anything from kind of firefighting on the day on a shoot, or whether you're out on location or in a studio, or that can be actually having a bit more time to try and focus on the problem that you might be trying to solve. But being creative, again, that creative thinking about how you solve an issue is a really, really, really big part of my job. And it normally comes with a lot of collaborative thinking with your series producer or your team, but certainly trying to come up with ways around issues that you inevitably always come up with is a big, big part of the job. Obviously, there's money management involved, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be good with your own finances. I know lots of people that are in production management that would say that they kind of are terrible with their own finances, but excellent with their production money management, which is obviously a really good thing. But you obviously need to be able to budget. You obviously need to be able to be creative within that budgeting. But again, I find that a really exciting prospect when you start on a production and you're given a pot of money to make this show, and it's really down to you to use that money in the best way possible and really make the best show that you possibly can. So again, an element of creativity with that money management as well. And then I'd say one of the biggest parts of my job, particularly as a line producer, when I'm working with lots of different stakeholders or third parties or different company directors, is you have to have excellent relationship skills. And that can come in the form of your day-to-day working with your team, or it can come with working with your series producer or your editor, or, as I say, sometimes commissioners or other stakeholders. But you really need to work and build on those relationships, because they're the things ultimately that really do get you through a production, and they really do make the best shows possible if you can build those relationships. And then finally, I'd say this is obviously slightly touching on some of the previous things that I just mentioned, but actually logistical planning is a huge part of the role. And whether that's looking at a schedule, whether that be a filming one or a post one, looking at your budget, looking at a editorial spec, whatever it is that you're looking at, actually working out logistically how you're going to make your show is a really, really, really big part of the job. And that's very much where the relationship of the production manager and the series producer really comes into play. When you're looking at actually how you make a show at the very beginning of any kind of production, whether you are pre or post commission, actually working with somebody to actually build out a bit of a roadmap on what it is that you're actually trying to do and the expectations is so key. So yeah, I would say if I had to sum it all up, being a Swiss knife is definitely what you are like being a production manager. So, one of the most key relationships that I have, every single production I have, is the relationship I have with my series producer or my exec producer, whoever it is that I'm kind of directly working with. And there is some really specific things that you need to think about when you're working with each other, both from a production management side and also a series producer side. And I would say that I've definitely learned along the way over the last kind of 16 years of me working in TV about ways of doing things and ways of not doing things, because ultimately it really does set the whole tone for a production, that working relationship. And it will end up being the key element between delivering an amazing program and delivering something that may have had a few pitfalls in it. And that is purely because both of those job roles are so integral to making a successful show, and that actually being respectful of each other and working together and not against each other is the best way of actually achieving that. So I'd say actually your relationship with your series producer is absolutely the first one that you should really put some time into. One of my key mottos that I always kind of try and say to my editorial colleagues is a good idea is absolutely nothing without a good plan. And I think that is a really good summary of working with previous productions where everybody has got so many ideas and so many kind of things that they want to do, and it can just feel very overwhelming. And sometimes it's a little bit too many cooks, too many voices, too many ideas. And actually what you really need to do is really break down exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve. If that's right at the start of your commission, maybe you haven't actually been commissioned yet, maybe you're putting together a pitch document and you're working with somebody in production management, one of the key things that you really need to do is sit down with your series producer and really work out exactly what it is that you are trying to achieve, and certainly the time frame behind that, because actually your time frame will be the thing that absolutely dictates whether you can actually achieve whatever the good idea or the brilliant show is that you are both there trying to make. A failed schedule is normally the thing that really does kind of throw everything off, and that can be anything from trying to do too much in too short a time, being very unrealistic with what it is that you're actually trying to achieve within that time, or actually just expecting too much of people, or perhaps actually, looking at, oh, well, we can do that and then we can travel to 200 miles away, and actually not really thinking about the logistics of what that actually would entail with your team. So the first thing I would really say is, when you start on a show, is really break down exactly what it is that you're trying to do and really look at that schedule, because actually money is always something that people think is the first thing that they really need to try and work out or certainly plot, but actually it really isn't. Your schedule is definitely the first thing that you should really look at, because without actually having a realistic schedule, it will absolutely affect everything from start to finish, and you certainly don't want to be in a position where you are late delivering your show. So a few things that can really go wrong when you're working in a production, which are definitely little red flags that you should think about when you are either starting your show or you're in the middle of production, is really make sure that everybody is always communicating really well with each other, because there is so many elements of your job as a production manager that you need to be across, and that often means not necessarily having the time to sit in every single meeting, every single brainstorm that's going on. So as a production manager, I always make a real effort to make sure I go and speak to my teams at certain points in the day, and really try and make sure that I've got an awareness of what everybody is planning, because you certainly don't want certain conversations about a hot air balloon going up and or somebody jumping out of an aeroplane and you're not aware of those things. So definitely try and make sure that your communication is as good as it can be, particularly with your teams, and just always make sure that you are physically not sat away from them. You're always checking in with them, and make sure that you're really part of that team so you can keep abreast of what people are doing. That's obviously really hard at the moment with everybody working at home, and it's something that I have really struggled with myself and had to really kind of learn new ways of doing it. But ultimately, I think, everybody's at the end of the phone, everybody's at the end of a Zoom, and actually just you have to make a little bit more effort to make sure that you are part of those processes. But it certainly makes that moment when you're all back in the office together really, really cool, because everybody's really missed each other. So definitely make sure your communication is really, really strong. And then one other really key thing that I think always tends to go wrong is the over promising and the under planning, and that can often come in the space of whether that is schedules or money or kind of time for your delivery. And actually, I think in the past, I've always really learnt by being really honest with whoever it is that you're delivering to, whether that be a channel or a commissioner within a department, and actually just be really upfront and honest at the start about what your schedule or your budget looks like, because it's far better to have those conversations right at the beginning and then adapt them and work with each other as you're working towards and through your show, than dropping the bombshell at the end of the show and go, oh, by the way, this is going to cost far more money, or we're not going to be able to actually deliver it on time. So be really honest and upfront at the beginning. And I know sometimes that can be quite difficult, particularly if you're pitching for work, but it will really help you out in the long term. So I'm going to show you a very quick clip now of a strand of shows that I worked on called the CBeebies Christmas shows. And these are quite phenomenal. They went from being something that only a very small amount of people wanted to see back in 2013 when we did the first show, to the final shows that I worked on being over 250,000 individual ticket requests. And it was just staggering seeing how popular they became on the channel, as well as all the other platforms that we had separate content for, and it really was quite exciting to see it grow. So here's a little clip of some of the shows I worked on.
This is the legend of the Queen, as cold as ice and snow. And if you don't believe me, then come and watch the show.
Did somebody say biscuits?
All of your favourite faces, music, fun and laughter in this year's The Snow Queen.
Do you believe in fairies?
Peter! Anything's possible in Neverland.
The most amazing, brilliant, wonderful land full of adventure.
Catch Peter Pan on CBeebies, unless I get to him first.
Come with me to a land full of wonder.
Have you all got your invitation?
I so want to go to the Queen's garden party.
What is your name?
Alice.
Hooray!
So join us for a wonderful adventure this Christmas.
CBeebies Alice in Wonderland.
So yes, I hope that's got you into the festive spirit slightly. But as a production manager, one of the really, really important things about working on these was actually being quite open to not knowing everything, which is quite a revelation, I think, sometimes when you become into senior management, just acknowledging that you aren't necessarily the biggest expert in the room. And I certainly wasn't, and neither was my series producers at the time. And that's purely because we had never worked in live theatre before, and we brought in a live theatre team to help collaboratively make these shows. And it was really, really important for us all to really listen to each other and to actually really learn from each other about how we were going to make this show. Certainly the first year it was a little bit trial and error, and as we obviously progressed through the years, it became smoother and slicker as everybody got to grips with what it was that we were doing. But as a production manager, one of the things that I really learned how to do, which is something that I've not experienced either before then or actually since, is working with so many different elements which weren't actually even TV. I actually managed all the audiences, all the ticketing, the publicity, all of the extra kind of press that we ended up having when we were down on the shows. And then I also managed all of the extra content that went out and as per the show's delivery. So there was a huge amount of other things that you had to think about outside of actually making the show itself. And then obviously we had the broadcast element, which actually seemed to be the kind of easiest part of actually making it all in the end. And finally, here are my 5 top tips for being the best production manager that you can be. So number one is be patient. And that sounds really simple, and sometimes it can be very testing to do so, especially when kind of everything else is falling around you. But actually being able to be patient with the situation, whether that is with your team or talent, contributors, crew, or even just a situation, actually allows you to think much more clearly about what it is that you need to try and do to either put that problem correct or actually just kind of move forward. So trying to be patient with your colleagues and the situation is definitely a top tip. So top tip number 2 is be super approachable. And that can be, again, quite a simple one, but actually it's really important. And sometimes that can come down to just your physicality when we are back in an office and you can be quite engrossed in your computer screen. And sometimes people don't think that you have got time to answer questions or that you want to be bothered with them. And actually that's when problems arise, because that's when people go off and they do things that they don't talk to you about, or you find out things secondhand, and that can be where problems can arise, as I touched on previously. So try and be as approachable as you can, even if you're really busy. Always make time for your team questions. Number 3 is be as creative as you can be. And sometimes that might mean actually being involved in the brainstorms or the creative idea planning meetings, or sometimes it can just be actually having a look at schedule and thinking about how you can do things better. But actually trying to be as involved in the creative as you can be, not just gives you a really good insight into the show that you're actually trying to make, but it's also really enjoyable. I myself love being part of the creative processes. I love being part of those brainstorms and coming up with ideas, whether that is actual kind of program ideas or whether that's, set designs or graphics or whatever it is. So try and get as involved in it as you possibly can, because ultimately it will make sure that you have a better understanding of the show that you're trying to make. Number 4, it sounds like a really obvious one, but just be the most organised that you can be. And whatever that looks like for you, make sure you do it. And whether that is kind of writing things down all the time, post-it notes on the wall, reminders in your phone, whatever it is you need to do, you just try and be as organised as you possibly can. And that goes actually for my editorial colleagues as well, because sometimes it might be that you don't have the luxury, and it is a luxury, of having a production manager with you at the very early stages of your commission. And so therefore you might have to take on some of those skills and some of that role. And by being the most organised you can be, it really will help you when you either hand over to your production manager or just moving forward into your production. So always keep a to-do list and always keep your post-it notes to hand. And tip number 5 is think outside the box. And I really do mean that in the most literal sense, because sometimes in this industry, there can be a real habit of a copy and paste attitude, whether that is to schedules or staffing, budgeting. It's always, well, this is the way we've done it before. And actually, as so many parameters in our industry change, so many different demands are made of us editorially, creatively, there's always going to be better ways of doing things. So when you start a production, look at this as a real opportunity to have a bit of a blank slate, do things differently, but always think outside the box when you're making a show. Even if it's kind of series 10 of a well-established band, there's always going to be better ways and ways to improve on doing what it is that you've done previously. So that is me done. Thank you so much for listening to The Art of Production Management. I really appreciate your time today. I hope that you've learnt a few tips and tricks, and that you may be thinking of production management as a future career. It would be brilliant to work with you at some point down the line. If you ever have any questions about production management, or you've ever got any queries about how to start making a show, whether that be budget or schedules or anything to do with the logistics part of a show, then please do get in touch. My email address is along the bottom here, and I'd love to hear from you. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great day and really enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.